Afternoon, everybody. It's like Friday at 3, which is a prime speaking spot after you've been listening to marijuana all day. And I might actually be last and least in this one. I've seen your lineup. You have had more of a showcase of the stars of marijuana legalization than people who watched 60 Minutes last week. So I'm the state's director of marijuana coordination. Since only Barbara's heard this joke, I'll do it again. My mom was really proud when I graduated from law school and became the lieutenant governor's chief of staff, and that's what I was for 3 years. She'd go to all the parties and tell everybody that I was lieutenant governor's chief of staff. And now that I'm the state's first pot czar, she goes around and tells everybody that I'm the lieutenant governor's chief of staff. And so, you know, it's hard on everybody sometimes. I overheard some of Adam's speech, and I'm going to be throwing some data at you that is a little bit different than what he just presented to you, and I'll try to explain the difference the best I can. But what I was going to do is run through some top-level data that we see and how we interpreted it as an administration. Once every 2 weeks, all the cabinet leaders who are somehow involved with marijuana legalization all get together, and we do review data and make sure that we have kind of the most unbiased and rigorous view of what's going on. I'm going to present some of that to you today. I'm also going to go into probably our biggest problem, which have you guys started to hear about home grows in gray market today? A little bit. Okay, I'm going to tell you that I think it's our single biggest problem with this whole thing, and really walk you through that problem, and with edibles, pesticides, and banking, and our short-term, long-term view, and hopefully leave time for questions and not put you guys all to sleep. So this is youth marijuana use over the last 10 years. This is where it sounds like Adam was using slightly different data, or what would look like a lot different data. So this is our Healthy Kids Colorado survey data. This is taken in school as an anonymous survey. We've been doing it for the last 10 years in this manner, and it's a big survey. We do about 17,000 kids every 2 years with this survey. So this is where we get our regional data from. When we say like Denver's been this and Aurora's been that, this is what helps us say that. And so it's really the stuff that our Department of Public Health and Environment believes this to be the gold standard of survey data. And it's a little confusing because both our high school and middle school data here shows statistically insignificant differences between before legalization and after legalization. It's important to note, so does NSDUH. This one also shows, as it's connected to national surveys, shows us at about the same place as the national line. I know NISDA shows us at the top. A couple of reasons why that might be. The first is that they're actually slightly separate age groups. The NSDUH data goes further in time, and then once you get past the age of 18, we of course have medical marijuana available legally at the age of 18, and so those numbers can be skewed. Doing it as a high school and middle school might change those numbers a little bit, but also they just don't seem to be the same numbers over time, and that's just sometimes how data works. It's interesting, they're both coalescing on the same numbers now, which is roughly 4 out of 5 kids don't regularly use marijuana in school, and it's been that way for the last 10 years. Interesting fact about this, in the 90s, we actually had 50% higher marijuana usage in schools than we do today, and so something has happened over the last 25 years, and again, I think some of that was that we realized that our tactics weren't working. DARE proved to be counterproductive towards our needs, and so what's really interesting about this Healthy Kids Colorado survey over time is that we've seen, one of the questions asked is do you see significant harm in using marijuana? And that number has plummeted over the last 10 years, and that makes sense. Internet has definitely tried to rebut the idea that marijuana is harmful. Marijuana has become medicine in 25 different states, and so that makes it confusing as well for a kid to see it as a significant harm. But what we expected to see, and what public health experts really expected to see, was an inverse correlation between decreased use of risk and increase use. So the less kids saw it as dangerous, the more they would increase use. We've not actually seen that yet. Doesn't mean we won't, and it's something that we worry about all the time. But an interesting case study on that is tobacco. Kids knew for a long time about the harms of tobacco, and it wasn't bringing use down. And that's because we believe, when we did focus group testing on it, kids didn't actually care about what was going to happen to them 30 years in the future. That you're at a party and you're offered a cigarette and you think about 10 minutes ahead of your life when you're 15 years old. And so when they started to realize that, the Truth Campaign came out, and the Truth Campaign said, big tobacco is making a fool out of you. And that was actually an incredible pivot point in the use of tobacco, and we saw tobacco rates plummet. And so I think part of what we have an opportunity here for is to see a different conversation with kids. And I'm not saying we know exactly what that conversation is. Right now, it's Protect What's Next. That's our campaign. Hopefully, none of you have ever seen it, because then we're not spending our dollars all that well. Actually, so it's on YouTube, and every once in a while it comes up for me, and I'm hoping it's like pulling up my Google history and seeing marijuana in it. And I'm hoping it's not just like you watch 14-year-old, you watch the same YouTube episodes that like 14-year-olds watch. But who knows? So the point is, right now, what our message is and what we got from focus group testing is trying to capture the immediate goals of teenagers. How do you protect getting a date? How do you protect your first job? How do you protect making a basketball team? All these different things that might be your immediate goal right now, and should marijuana really be part of that conversation? So I think one of the interesting things to watch over time, because tobacco rates are plummeting right now amongst teenagers, is if we can really get those messages, along with better intervention services, behavioral health specialists in schools, really find a different way of talking to kids right now, we might actually be able to move the needle differently on youth prevention in the long term than we do right now. And so it's something we're excited about. It's actually kind of an opportunity here that we don't have to have the same language we've always had around marijuana with these kids, and we also have the resources to do it. School suspension rates is interesting, because I think this also speaks back to Adam's point about availability and what that does to changing consumption rates. In 2009, 2010 was when medical marijuana came on, and you suddenly saw a huge increase in drug-related school suspensions. I think that this is probably where you saw the availability go from pretty, marijuana is pretty available to marijuana is as available as you need it in high school. Especially, so it's important to remember, again, 18 years old and you can get a medical marijuana card, so an enterprising 18-year-old can be the drug dealer for the school in this way. And so you actually you saw an increase in the drug suspension rate, even as total suspension rates were going down. The surprising thing is we haven't really seen that, and that was dramatic. I mean, you could see that switch as a flip the day that commercial recreational marijuana started. We thought we would see that with recreational, and we haven't so far. And I think because even in this Healthy Kids Colorado survey as well, the same percentage of kids are saying marijuana is available as they were before. And I think what we're saying is that availability was actually here under the medical system. Recreational didn't really change it all that much in the short term. And so an interesting statistic to look through. Adult use marijuana in Colorado, 18 years and older. This is interesting. Again, I think we thought in the short term we would see an increase in frequent use by 18 and older. It stayed roughly the same between the first 2 years of legalization. Unfortunately, we don't really have as good of a data the year before commercialization on this study. What this doesn't capture is how much somebody is smoking, so it just captures the number of people. And certainly, as prices drop, elastic demand for marijuana might change the amount people are smoking, and that's not captured here. Also interesting, broken out by age groups, I think we all expected 18 to 25 to go up quite a bit. We're not seeing that so far. I wish 65 plus was just a little bit more, and then I could say it's statistically significant, because I think that's awesome. And anecdotally, we are hearing that this is a pain relief for a lot of people over the age of 65, better than having 3 glasses of wine in order to fall asleep, and that these are people who didn't really want to go to their doctor and tell them, I want edibles to go to sleep at the end of the night. It'll be interesting to watch that market. Again, it's a very small part of the market, but interesting nonetheless. And this is the actual good news about marijuana legalization, and that's that arrests have gone down, and I think that was kind of the purpose of marijuana legalization, and I think even more. So we saw a huge decrease between 2012 and 2013, and that was good news. We started to see some things inch back up, particularly 10 to 17-year-olds. We were getting very concerned that that enforcement on 10 to 17-year-olds had changed, and so suddenly, because of, I don't know, different policing practices or whatever that dynamic shift is, we would continue to see the 10 to 17 arrests rate go up, but we actually saw a pretty good decrease in 2015. The data just released, and we actually saw it across the board, and so we're arresting about 80% fewer people overall for marijuana-related crimes, which I think was probably the purpose for a lot of people other than tax revenue, which we'll get into. The kind of bad news on this is the arrest rate, the arrest percentages. One of the things I think we were also hearing about why people were frustrated with the war on drugs is that we were disproportionately arresting Hispanic and African American communities. That disproportion remains, even though all the raw numbers have gone down. It's actually a little worse than it was before legalization, and I'm not the one to account for that, but that's just the data as it is. So again, everybody's arrest numbers, the raw numbers have gone down, the rates have gone down, but the percentage per population has remained disproportionately African American and Hispanic. Same data in the court filings here. Sorry, 1 second. Again, we see it go down. Again, the 10 to 17-year-olds, though, there's some stuff to watch there as it's remained pretty, it has not budged all that much, and it went up a little bit in 2015. And so some numbers to look at, to watch in the long term. DUIDs, have you guys talked about driving while high yet today? Okay, so driving while high is really hard to measure for data for us right now, and there's a couple of reasons. One is we redefined this law 3 years ago and made it an easier law to track. And then we paid millions of dollars to train officers in specific training for DUIDs called A-Ride training. And so when you do that, you would expect to see an increase no matter what. Basically, you've better defined the law and you've added a lot of enforcement agents. And then the other part is that it's much more difficult to tell if somebody simply has marijuana in their system or they're intoxicated from marijuana. And those are not nearly as correlated as they are with alcohol. And so it's just it's a harder system to get your hands wrapped around, and we're very sketchy about putting out DUID information, but I'm going to do it anyway because I think it's worthwhile. We were a little surprised. 2015, 2016, we saw a slight uptick in marijuana-related driving offenses. This is our state patrol. It went from total marijuana, and that's marijuana, and alcohol, and marijuana and other drugs, went from 363 in 2015 to 467 in 2016. Back in 2014, it was 402. So the numbers haven't gotten huge, but they're there and worth keeping an eye on. And again, this is just the state patrol and what they're capturing, but that's kind of a good proxy for the state. This is the more concerning statistic for us. Again, urge a lot of caution while looking at these numbers, but in 2013 we had 55 drivers who were involved in roadway fatalities that tested positive for THC. In 2015, that was 99 drivers, and as a portion of fatal accidents, it represented 11% in 2013. 2015, it represents 18%. So the reason I tell you to be cautious on that, first of all, again, we can't tell you that this is impairment. All we can tell you is that that marijuana was present in their systems when they were in the crash. You could have smoked a month ago, and sometimes that still shows up in your system. The second part of that is we might also be testing a lot more now, and it's really hard to capture that in our data because all it tells you is if there's been a test, not what we've tested for. So we might have before been sending tox screens out for alcohol only, but now we have funding available for marijuana, so it's alcohol and marijuana. So again, it's one of those things, when we talk to other states who are thinking about legalization, we tell them, please dig into this data now, because you'll have better baseline data to know the year after legalization whether or not you have a problem. And I think we don't have good enough baseline data to know if this is a problem. It's certainly something that we want to keep a close eye on. I'm going to go into the gray market real quick. We've talked about these things. So we legalized medical marijuana in 2000. We legalized recreational marijuana in 2012. And when we did that, Amendment 20 basically just had you could go become a patient, get a recommendation, you could grow your own, or you could have a caregiver grow for you, not for profit, supposedly. That's all in an unlicensed system. So again, you heard from Barb Broll, that's this licensed system. We tag every marijuana plant from seed to sale. There's a radio frequency identifier tag. This one instead is all on the unlicensed side and kind of relying on the good faith of the people who are using it. And so you could both be a caregiver, and right now you can grow 99 plants as a caregiver, or you could be a patient, and actually patients can get extended plant counts and often are getting extended plant counts to individually for themselves grow 99 plants. And that's because of the way Amendment 20 was written. Amendment 64 also allows for you to grow your own 6 recreational plants, but it also says you're allowed to assist others in growing their 6 plants. And so far we have failed to define what assist means. And so there's a lot of cooperatives out there who like at the end of today, I say, why don't you guys all sign over your 6 plants to me and I'll assist you in growing them, and either you'll get your marijuana back or I'll give you a nice check later on, and we're finding that happens. And then what's moreover is we find people just kind of switching back and forth as it suits them best. And of course, a pound of marijuana in Colorado goes from 1,000, 2,000. And in a different state goes for about 4,000, 5,000. And so the economic incentive to abuse the home grow system here and sell it out of state by the ton is really high. And so, of course, what we have seen is organized crime do it. And so here's the evidence, even just after the last 2 years. I don't expect you to be able to read this at all. But basically what it says is where we have seen murders, where we have seen tens of thousands of plants, marijuana plants, pounds, we've seen criminal cartel action. So the most recent one was Laotians, but we're also seeing Chinese, Floridians of Cuban descent. There's all these organized crime groups that are actually here abusing this home grow system. It's, again, one of our biggest problems. Just about a month ago, there was an organized raid by the DEA where 12 properties in southern Colorado were all seized at once, and it was 22,400 pounds of marijuana. That's roughly $7 million of marijuana that was found overnight. And so when people ask me how it's going, I'm telling them there's kind of a tale of two worlds. The regulated system is acting about how you would expect a regulated system to act. There's some hiccups, there's some back and forth, there's industry tension. This unlicensed home grow system is really out of control, and we should be putting better guardrails on it. And unfortunately, that requires legislation, or really to do it, probably a constitutional amendment, and that's obviously a hard thing to do in Colorado. It's also a hard problem to explain. Consequences are not great. Again, this is the growth of the gray market. If anybody's going to divert to youth, it would be from these people. They don't have the public health and public safety oversight. It undercuts our licensed regulated system all over the place. Of course, there's an expansion of the organized criminal enterprise. There's a lot of property destruction we're seeing from this. People are renting houses in suburbs and blowing out the basement real big and growing their 99 plants in those basements and leaving them with huge electrical problems, space problems, smell problems, mold problems that you just don't recover from. Outdoor grows, we're seeing the same thing. And then there's the environmental impacts. People are tapping into water wells that they shouldn't be tapping into and just really abusing the system. Not to be a dooms person about this, but this is not a good problem for Colorado to have. Other things that we see back in the license system and issues we've been dealing with over time. Edibles has obviously been a major topic of conversation for a while. We've identified 3 problems with edibles that are worth talking about. The first is overdosing. There was obviously the marijuana-related death of Levi Tamba with that, where he came into town. This is unfortunately something we see a lot of. They eat one. He even knew how much to eat. He had a cookie, and they divided it in 6 pieces, and he had one piece, waited about 30 minutes, had a second piece, and I believe had a third piece, and then felt all the effects of it 2 to 3 hours later, and had a psychotic break, and ended up jumping off a rooftop and killing himself. We hear those in much less tragic situations quite often, that people will have one, have to feel like they just don't respond to marijuana, drink alcohol, and then have a really rough night. It's most prevalent among tourists. Coloradans seem to have gotten the message a little bit more. There is public education campaigns about this in Colorado, but tourists come. Tourists like to overindulge in a lot of things. Alcohol, you know, you're on vacation, but edibles, I think they don't recognize that you could have pretty big danger signs from them, and they are showing up in our hospital and calling our poison control center lines at a much higher rate than they were before. Our regulatory response to this has been both a public education campaign, also marijuana now comes in either single dose size or easily scored and demarcated, so it's intuitive to know when you're having a single dose. Rather than allowing 6 doses in a cookie, you have 1 dose in a cookie now. Second problem we've been seeing is accidental consumption. It's left out on a counter. Somebody who doesn't know what it is eats it. That's happened a few times with maids who've been cleaning up rooms and edibles was left over. More tragic than it sounds, unfortunately. Happens with little kids too, and happens with pets quite often. And what we've done with that is, first of all, you used to be able to leave the store in a childproof resealable package called an exit package. But we thought maybe people are going home and taking it out of the exit package, and then it's just sitting there in non-childproof resealable packaging. They now have to leave the manufacturer in childproof resealable packaging, opaque. And so it looks much more like medicine bottles now than it does like an envelope, and it is also in the container that you're most likely to keep it in throughout the process of using it. The second thing we've done is now every edible has to be individually scored and individual symbol on it with an exclamation point and the letters THC. It's a universal symbol. For some people who don't speak English or truly didn't know that this is an adulterated product, that will help for them. And for people like for babies or for pets, it allows the parent to know or the owner to know that this was an adulterated product and this person should seek medical treatment. And so again, it's the same thing we would do with over-the-counter drugs. If it's something that shouldn't be that you should know that you're taking, it should be marked on the product itself. And the third part that we recognized is what signal are we truly sending to kids about the nature of marijuana when it comes in gummy bear form, and is that really something we need to do in Colorado? And so and this is hard because they're like, well, everything's attractive to kids, sure, but a gummy bear seems to be purposefully attracted to kids. And so we went and passed legislation last year that banned it in the shape of animals, people, and fruits, and went to industry and said, listen guys, stay far away from the line. Don't try to sidle up to the line, because then we're going to come back and run a piece of legislation to ban your product. Go closer to Godiva than to kids' candy. And we'll see what they do with that. But that's a good place for them to start learning what self-regulation means, and to start behaving in a more responsible manner, and maybe to self-shame a little bit in that area. Quickly on pesticides and on banking. So pesticides and banking are actually more similar than different, and that is that the federal government normally does this and not the state government. The EPA regulates pesticides, and a whole bunch of people. FinCEN though really regulates the banks, the OCC. It's all these boring groups, and it's still federally illegal. So for pesticides, we've done the best we can to in-house that and say, here's the 100 or so pesticides that we know to not be harmful. Pesticides is a guilty until proven innocent kind of thing. You need to show that it's okay to be smoked, it's okay to be eaten, it's okay to be rubbed on your skin, and that these are like appropriate for indoor use. All these different things that have to be shown with pesticides. We've done the work for industry and just listed it on our website. We don't do that for any other crop. And then we say if we find something else on it, we're going to destroy your marijuana. Well, it turns out a lot of them were growing with a lot of these things. And so we did have to put quite a few plants on hold. It was probably the biggest strain financially between industry and the government, and really was a pretty rocky couple of months there. Banking, we're more on the same side. We all want to see banking, and so we've tried as many Hail Mary passes on this as possible. We did a cannabis credit union. We started an entirely new financial system called a cannabis co-op. All of those have been rejected by the Federal Reserve, unfortunately. However, what is working and what seems to work in general with the federal government here has been please let us give you forgiveness rather than permission. Every time we have to give you permission for something, we end up that it's a crime, so we can't say yes. But if you just do it in a responsible manner, you won't hear from us. And so that's the way it's worked for the regulatory system. It's turned out that that's worked okay in the banking industry. We've seen credit unions and commercial banks, smaller groups, come online. And so the pun I always try, and let's see how it goes, is that it's not an unbanked industry, it's an underbanked industry, and some people say it's a half-banked industry. I'll be here all night. That's the first time I've gotten bad applause for it, too. So I really do hate puns. The ones people like more are like joint committee or getting in the weeds. And thank you. So that's the like short-term overview of what's going on in Colorado, at least from the administration's point of view. It's important to note, I think, I think everybody wants to know where the governor's voice is on here. I think the governor was really concerned on day one, and he was, of course, against Amendment 64. In the short term, he's been pleasantly surprised that he hasn't seen the sort of spikes that I think he was really fearing, either by increased fatalities or consumption rates changing at a dramatic rate, the kind of things that would create a runaway train that he really worries about. There's still, I think he would say, and I know he would say because he does, that the long-term data is really out on this, and these are more long-term data questions, public health, public safety questions about how consumption rates change over the long term with commercialization and normalization. And I think one of the things really missing from that debate is also the substitution and complement effect. Is this use something that complements tobacco use, alcohol use, hard drug use? Is it something that substitutes for those three things? Until we know that, we kind of don't know what sort of public health impacts we're having on Colorado in a holistic way rather than just in this bubble of marijuana. And I think he would say, listen, also the tax revenue is nice. It's about $140 million last year, but it's a $27 billion budget. And so please don't expect us to pay more to teachers, to be able to pave roads, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I think in voters' minds we were going to be able to do with this. $140 million doesn't solve billion-dollar types of problems. It's good money for both paying for regulation, $40 million to school construction, but again, that's a couple billion-dollar need right there. $40 million to school construction, and then good youth prevention services, good substance abuse services. This year we're recommending about $18 million that goes into homelessness, both rapid rehousing and permanent housing for homelessness. Our reason for that isn't because we know that there's a causal link, but rather we think that the voters of Amendment 64 were asking for public health answers to drug addiction rather than incarceration answers to drug addiction. Well, the single best public health answer is to provide homelessness or a home for the homeless. That's the most at-risk population for continued drug abuse, and that's the best known intervention for them. So we're hoping to see those sorts of things pay off. So it's good money. It's just not the big money that I think is in some people's minds. With that, I think I'm exactly on time for 12 minutes of questions. So, or like it's like 3:48 and I know I'm your last speaker, so have at it like you will.
We have a question from one of the live stream viewers. He would like to know, how much does the state spend on marijuana regulation?
Yeah. So let me talk about cost in a couple of different ways. I consider it to be about 20 to 25 million a year for total cost of regulation, but I also include our public education campaigns and money that goes to law enforcement in that number, and also survey money, because I believe that if without those things you aren't truly dealing with regulation. I believe all told we were somewhere around 10 million for the division itself, the Marijuana Enforcement Division last year, and that was mainly covered by fees and not by tax revenue. So those are kind of two answers to it. I also get a lot of questions about, does marijuana cover its own costs? the immediate costs, yes. How you decide to do the like big C societal costs is a much more political answer than that.
Hi.
Hi.
That arrest data is pretty exciting. I agree. That's cool.
Yep.
So if roughly 44%, I don't know, that's the statistic we got earlier, of regular users are making under $25,000 a year, is heavily taxing marijuana like kind of inadvertently a regressive tax?
So it's the same argument for tobacco tax
Yeah.
along the way, and it's hard. It's hard to say because, and I think this one's even more tricky because we also have medical marijuana, and so there's kind of a buyer's discount if you want it. So so many times the exact reason or the public health reason to tax something at the higher rate is so actually low-income people use less of it, and that saves on their medical costs over time. The tax on cigarettes is supposed to save a couple 10,000 lives because it actually does cut down, and that's actually been borne out in statistics. I'm not sure you're going to see that with marijuana because we have medical marijuana, and so people can just go to the 3% tax whenever they want to, and it's a fairly easy system to get into in Colorado. So I will tell you, I just think it's a very complicated answer right now. I'm not sure we have the tax rate right at all, and I'm not sure anybody could know if we have the right tax rate, in part because we just kind of made it up. And we didn't actually, you guys did because you voted on it. And so I think that's going to take so much more research and so much more. And the states that are coming online are all doing it very differently as well. So it's going to be worth watching what they do.
Any other questions?
You guys really must be, this is the first time I've not gone full time on questions. And so that must speak to, oh, sorry.
Sorry. Can you estimate roughly how much money the state has saved on the arrests?
Not well.
Okay.
And I also think it's probably not worth doing again for a little bit longer. These are questions that are kind of interesting so like the economics report that Adam and MPG put out, that's interesting, and for other states it's vital information. Again, the cost savings is interesting, and for other states might be vital information. For how we govern as the state of Colorado, we're no longer wondering whether or not we legalize marijuana. We already did. And so for us, there's like, that doesn't change our governing down the road. For other states, they might want to look at that information. So I don't think it's a good dollar spend for Colorado to do that study. I welcome other people doing that sort of study.
I have a quick question if nobody else does. Today we primarily talked about marijuana, but we didn't really touch the hemp side, either industrial hemp or hemp
Great.
for oil. Thoughts? What do you think is going to go forward with that? Where do you see it as an economic development potential?
Yep. So hemp has been growing exponentially, but we're still talking about the tens of thousands of acres and not the hundreds of thousands of acres that I think in order to be a major industrial crop you'd need to see. A lot of it is hemp oil, and that is the kind of CBD strains that have been becoming famous. Charlotte's Web is now a hemp strain rather than a marijuana strain. But what I'm hearing most from that group is, first of all, the laws are a little too murky for them still to be an export business. They can't figure out when it's the right time to be, when they are legally allowed to export it. And I can tell you the federal government is not being very helpful in clarifying it. And the second part of that is, unlike another crop that can be shipped to a different state for production, we'll have to grow the production facilities within Colorado, and that's tough on economy for an agricultural good. To have all that built up inside Colorado, and so until those get a little bit more clarified, I think you'll see a ceiling to hemp along long term, and it'll remain a niche market. If those get cleaned up, I think we could be off to the races for hemp.
And who has to clean that up? Does the industry, the federal government needs to? Okay.
I think it's too hard to in-house this within Colorado, again, because unless all the production centers for hemp came to Colorado and then felt very good about when they were allowed to export across the country, then I don't think the economy can quite get there with that.
Super. Any other questions from anybody? All right. Oh, wait, there is, right over there.
Just when you think you're out.
I got here a little bit late. Did anybody address the number of people moving to Colorado before legalization, Amendment 64, and afterwards solely because we have passed this amendment?
So
Percentage or a
I think probably the best statistic we have on that is actually probably for tourists rather than for people permanently moving, which there's not a great survey out there for that. I will tell you that people are moving here fast, but they've been moving here fast for about the last 8 years, and so that the trend line hasn't changed all that much, but it is a very healthy trend line for that. For tourism, when we finally ask the question the right way, it turns out 4% of tourists come here specifically for marijuana tourism. The rest who come here and engage in marijuana while they're here kind of do it the same way that they would craft brewing, right? That they're heading up to the mountains. Craft brewing seems fun. It seems like a Colorado thing, and that's the thing they do here. Same thing about stopping in a marijuana shop in Breckenridge. Part of where I get this question is always on homelessness and whether or not we actually have homeless moving to Colorado. And we're in a study to see if that's true and to see why that would be true. It would actually be a first in homelessness literature. It's called the magnet effect, and it's been proven wrong a number of times where changes in the economy or changes in social services, people say, well, if we offer free housing to everybody, we'll just have a whole bunch of homeless move here. It's never proven to be true before that a change in policy has changed where a homeless person is living. But marijuana has done a lot of things for the first time. And so it's worth the study. Maybe they're coming here because they think there's jobs. What the governor says is be careful, because the other thing that's happened is we've grown really fast and we have not grown affordable housing in the way that kind of growth demands. And so that's got to be a large part of the picture of what we're seeing for homelessness.
Thank you.